might virtual influencers have on safety and mental health? Let's welcome this next panel who's going to dive deeper into these aspects. Please welcome the next panel around whose influence is it anyways? Introducing Theo Presley, XRSI advisor, Charmaine Lee, and moderating the panel is String Yun. Theo Presley, our XRSI advisor, a leading tech futurist and globally recognized author and public speaker on the convergence of emerging trends towards the metaverse and Web3. Theo is the CEO and co-founder of Metanomics, also a key supporter to today's track. Thank you so much for all that financial support, Theo. Much appreciated. And also, Metanomics is an AI analytics platform for game developers, metaverse builders, and the creator economy. He is an expert in the field of technology and metaverse and is currently helping game developers and metaverse builders gain insights through AI analytics. Next is on the panel, Charmaine, a product manager at Snap AR, working on Lens Studio. Charmaine is dedicated to making AR authoring more accessible and has a background in building social XR experiences. She has worked on the creation and mixed reality at companies such as Unity Labs, Microsoft, Slack, and Pinterest. Charmaine is an expert in the field of AR and mixed reality and is currently helping to make AR more accessible to the creators of Snap. String is a 4x LinkedIn top voice and the CEO of Chubbyverse. String believes that NFTs are access tokens to the Web3 brands and leverages her marketing and community growth expertise to explore the intersections of innovation and community. The Chubbyverse, which was founded in September 2021, has gone viral, gaining 47 million Jiffy views in 4 weeks, an average of 1.5 million monthly impressions on Twitter. String has also built a personal following online with 70,000 followers on LinkedIn and a strong presence on other platforms. In her spare time, Spring enjoys hunting for the best fried chicken spots. So String, handing it over to you. Please take it away. String, unmute. String, are you able to unmute? Can you unmute yourself, String?
Oh no, String.
Oh no.
Right. Try unmuting now.
Help.
All right. All right.
Oh, was that you? I think we heard you.
Yeah, we heard you. String, are you able to unmute yourself and talk? Would love to figure out how to get String's things back. And in the interest of our live stream and making sure that we're utilizing this time, I would love to then go over to all of you. Well, first of all, I mean, String, I'm so sorry. Having some technical difficulty hearing your audio. If you want to log back in, until then, I'll hold the fort for you. Sounds good? And there is volunteers who would help you with the audio as well. Not able to unmute. Sorry about that, everyone. This is a very technological dependent effort and intervention. So let me go over to both of you, Charmaine and Theo. And so what is this? What's your definition of this virtual influencer? And how do they differ from human influencer? Curious. And I'm really glad that you guys kind of prepared some of these remarks and reflections. So I'm just kind of going to fill in for String while we get her back. Yeah, let's start with you, Charmaine. What are virtual influencers and how are they different from human influencers?
Yeah, for sure. So human influencers, like regular traditional influencers, they're all too familiar to us at this point. So you have like traditional celebrities, actors, actresses, singers, artists, right? And a lot of them have some sort of online virtual presence. Um, and they have like social media accounts that expand kind of their influence far beyond their professional or official opportunities that they typically have. We also have like internet celebrities like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok influencers who gained all of their fame online, like Charlie D'Amelio, Emma Chamberlain, Mr. Beast, and them. But despite their virtual presence, none of those are actually virtual influencers. Virtual influencers are wholly created with technology, so like 3D modeling, motion capture, other like similar tracking and rendering capabilities that actually brings someone who's essentially fully fictional to life, and whether that be like fictional in their voice, personality, or just visual experience, appearance, visual appearance. So, yeah. Theo, did you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think you actually covered it all. I mean, all I can really sort of say is it's interesting to see the evolution of where streamers and virtual and regular influencers are starting to adopt these technologies to actually create a different persona in a sense as well. I think virtual influencers allow people to create almost an extension of what they are physically in a completely different environment, and they can also alter their appearance, and they can potentially adopt an alter ego as well, which kind of sort of brings into question who they really are, and acting as, and that can bring different kind of brand influences into that as well, because as a virtual influencer you have far more creative scope to work with brands and to work with with organizations than you would have in the physical world.
Right. I see that String is joined us. So String, could you please try unmuting yourself and let's see if you're able to talk? You definitely are amplified. I was able to hear you before. It'd be too bad if we couldn't get you live. Too
No.
bad. I'm so sorry about this, guys. But let's go. We'll have some of our volunteers sort of help String out. In the meantime, I'm certainly going to try to save airtime here. And Theo, before we go into another question, I'm really wondering because you've had this like impact of OpenGPT very recently, and that's changed the dynamics how people are being influenced. People are, some of the people are in the op. What do you think is a virtual influencing space of potential artificial intelligence, generation contents, etc.? Do you anticipate that this field is, just virtual influencing itself is about to sort of be impacted by this intersection of artificial intelligence in general?
Yes, I do. I mean, I can actually see a lot of purely automated virtual influencers taking the stage soon. I mean, with kind of human-like qualities in terms of Chat GPT and being able to generate, fairly decent chunks of text from simple text commands. I don't think it's any stretch of the imagination for someone to essentially spin up a virtual avatar creation and then feed it text commands, which it would then relay in a text to voice way, and they would have very little, I guess, human input, or certainly be a human way to drive this avatar, and certainly just give it free rein to the AI to the point where maybe in a couple of years you actually have an influencer who is purely reacting to the inputs, or certainly to the stimuli in the environment itself. Whether it's from fans sending it text messages, or whether it's music, whether it's images or whatever. And the avatar will react accordingly. So it's interesting to see how quickly this is accelerating. I think certainly in the last 6 months, we know that OpenAI was doing experiments. We've seen Midjourney, we've seen Stable Diffusion and things like that coming out the woodwork. Then ChatGPT. And I think in the next 6 months, we're going to see that fusion happen, and I think it's going to be fairly unrecognizable what we're going to see.
Yeah, and String, I don't know if you're able to unmute now. I definitely toggled unmute alls for everyone. Try again.
Oh no.
This is so interesting. I'm so sorry. So you want to go to lobby and get our volunteers to help you, okay? But in the meantime, I'm going to actually take opportunity here and ask my favorite question. For favorite in the sense, like, this is something that I'm deeply interested in. So since we're part of Metaverse Safety Week, what kind of impact might these virtual influencers have on our safety and mental well-being? Charmaine, you are creating augmented reality experiences, and you're so concerned about this human-centeredness. I'd love to hear from you, like, how could this impact the human aspect?
I just got like a message that says help. That's so ominous. But yeah, for sure. Let's talk about like safety and well-being. So yeah, when we talk about like virtual influencers, like strength or creative capacity to be in like make more places, to be able to pick up more projects, like they can really kind of mold themselves based on their audience, and kind of, yeah, like it's very different, right? What our existing influencers can do. So like, how do we make sure that these influencers that are often like carefully curated by either individuals or teams or brands of people are actually being ethical and responsible with the influence that they have? And there's also a reason that companies are starting to explore virtual influencing as like a marketing campaign, because it just feels really organic and less marketing-y to an ordinary audience. And this happens across platforms everywhere, right? So like people do paid sponsorships on TikTok, Instagram, and that's also why it's important for them to label their videos with like paid sponsorship, or they have like a sponsor hashtag. It's really important for viewers to know like the intention behind the content that they're consuming, and like the influencers that they're taking these content from. So I think like a similar set of rules really should be applied to virtual influencers, where there's transparency around the work and, you know, advocacy or whatnot that they're doing. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So like I was thinking yesterday how people would watch HSN or QVC to actually look for things to buy, and that's fine, right? It's very intentional marketing, but at least they know what they're watching, and that's really important. And then the modern world of influencing in general, whether it be virtual or traditional, really, I think that there is a lot of content that feels like unhealthy thought patterns and lifestyles that like I've seen, you know, having myself grown up on the internet and browsing websites like Tumblr and YouTube. There's a lot of terms that children are particularly vulnerable to messaging that's conveyed through mass media. So with virtual influencing, that 100% becomes part of the problem as well, right? So you can have people, a new generation of people who have like, you know, EDs and things like that. So it's, yeah, it's definitely a cause of concern as we build out something that is, you know, seemingly very exciting. How do we make sure we're being very ethical about it?
Yeah, I can't even imagine the, you know, converging impact from AI could do. Theo, like what is this anticipated impact on human health and well-being then from your perspective?
To add to what Charmaine said, I think the unhealthy aspect, I think is almost mirrored in what's been happening in the physical and certainly the internet as we see today. Like Charmaine said about people glamorizing particular mental health conditions as almost as a talking point, but they're unqualified in giving that advice or certainly those opinions. And of course that leads to a knock-on effect of other people kind of sort of taking on that advice and then thinking that this is some kind of self-help way of or a way of accessing therapy or self-help when in fact it's actually more dangerous. I think the other thing as well with virtual influencers is that they can also reinforce these kind of sort of negative body images. With a virtual influencer, you can essentially create the perfect body image that you want as a person, and then of course other people see that as thinking, well, actually, this is what I want to aspire to. I want the perfect cheekbones. I want the perfect hair. Even though it's virtual, they still associate that with the person. And then you've now got a virtual appearance being almost perfect and aligned to the physical appearance, and it's still associated with a person at the end of the day. And that person has, however many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers. And some people, will not be able to distinguish or make that distinction between virtual and physical. In their minds, that is the person in front of them, and so that gives them that kind of sort of body dysmorphia kind of sort of mentality where it's like, I must look like this person, and we've seen that with people who have almost transformed their bodies into looking like Barbie dolls, and it's going to be, again, it's going to be interesting and scary in a way to see how people who are susceptible to that react to virtual influencers in a negative way.
And I wonder if that also translates to, and I'm going to go over to Charmaine again. But Charmaine, all these points that both of you are stating, how much of that is then translating to some of the economic factor? Is like, being rich and famous becomes de facto, and then, is it going to take us into, uncharted sort of a cultural aspect where apparently virtual influencer could be leading our next generation into believing, what's the way to live, what's the best way to live, etc. Especially like money wise.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And like while Theo was talking, right, like I was also just thinking, the interesting thing that virtual influencers that traditional influencers can't really do is take advantage of brands or figures that you already trust and then like put an extra lens onto it that's like actually deceptive, right? Like I was seeing how like Barbie started vlogging on Instagram, and like Barbie is very much a household name that everyone knows, and then now Barbie could be saying anything and it feels like Barbie's talking to you, but you don't actually know Barbie. Like it's kind of weird that kids can be consuming that, and like it's just uncharted territory. And like, yeah, 100%, right? Our lifestyles and economy, like that's going to be really interesting, especially as we see like also brands moving into virtual influencing and then also making like a lot more 3D digital fashion. Like we know Prada has done some ads with like virtual influencers. I know like Gucci is very notorious for doing a lot of like metaverse clothing. It kind of makes consumption and purchasing of items easier than ever as well. And this very visible sense of wealth as well that might be really different. In like you can't look into my home, whereas maybe in the metaverse that can change. And the display of wealth would be different. I'd be curious about like Theo, what you have on this topic as well.
Yeah.
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 Oh, sorry.
Go ahead there.
Oh, so that's actually a really interesting point because if you look at video games in general, you have Counter-Strike Go skins that actually go for a lot of money. People create these skins, and some of them are extremely desirable,
Right.
for their weapons, and very expensive. And of course, that's a sign of wealth, because you've potentially spent hundreds of dollars, in some cases thousands of dollars, to own this, and then you're running around this game, and people know how much that was worth. This is the thing, people are aware of the worth of that particular item. And with virtual influencers, you mentioned a couple of brands. I mean, I know that Marks and Spencer's recently launched their own virtual influencer. Obviously, it was kind of lambasted a little bit, because it kind of goes against who they are, and then again, the type of influence. Again, it kind of goes back to the whole body aspect, and the look and feel. The influencer that they created kind of goes against the typical audience demographic as well. So it was kind of like a white young female, looks very trendy. When if you actually look at the demographic, they're usually about maybe mid sort of 40s, 50s people who shop at Marks and Spencer's, and they took a bit of flack around that. And obviously, brands are trying to experiment and move with the times. But anyway, sorry, I digress, and I kind of jumped tracks an awful lot. But going back to Charmaine's point, the display of wealth, it kind of, we've seen how many parents have been caught out with children taking their credit cards, and suddenly they've racked up thousands of dollars in buying Fortnite skins or something like that, or certainly purchases on mobile games. And it kind of makes me wonder whether we'll see a kind of, sort of shift in the same patterns, where kids and certainly young adults are buying lots of things and getting into debt because they want to keep up with a virtual influencer, and display that wealth, that kind of wealth and those digital assets to their friends, their friends and families. And yeah, could it be an unhealthy obsession? I think it could be with the wrong people.
Yeah, I see String is back, so String,
Hello.
jump in.
Hi,
Hey,
finally.
we can hear
Can
you.
you hear me now? Yay!
Awesome. Right, I'm gonna leave you all and be right here.
Oh, if you don't mind recapping for me, were we talking about how brands and the negative impact of virtual influencers? Because it sounds like, Theo, you were talking about how kids are stealing parents' credit cards to keep up with the trends. Is that the topic today?
Yeah, the question was kind of like, what are the negative kind of behaviors? And Charmaine, when we started talking about the wealth, so the display of wealth, and influencers in the real world, obviously, people aspire to their kind of lifestyle, and can virtual influencers obviously give off that kind of the same air, and say, this is my lifestyle in the virtual environment, and you must aspire to be like me. And of course, that triggers off a different kind of set of behaviors again, with with real people trying to recreate a digital lifestyle in the same way as a virtual influencer. And of course, that costs money. It's not free, even though it's digital. It still costs money.
Okay, so if that's the case, like we're talking about the negative impact, what are some of the positive impact virtual influencers have in this environment?
Oh, you're asking the wrong person. I'm an extreme cynic.
Yeah.
There's always like one side of the thing, so let's go to the other extreme.
Yeah,
I
I think what's... Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
No, go ahead, Charmaine.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that, like, despite there are many negative impacts of social media, right? Like, we hear about them all the time. I think something like the rise of TikTok has also drawn our attention to a lot of those inherent problems with like influencer culture, and how, I think we talked about this earlier as well, like how does it lead to negative thought patterns, unhealthy expectations of what bodies should look like, etc. Right? So there's like all these things that are wrong with like influencer culture. But what is really interesting is that even a platform like TikTok, for example, we've actually seen a lot of creators choosing to make like how-to content or like educational content because they do really well, right? Like people want to upskill themselves through their like their free time consuming this media. And so there's like a lot of kind of willing content where folks are like actually just creating this like positive content organically. Even like for example, we're doing like a lot of AR content and we're actually leveraging influencers to help like educate others about like how to actually create more AR content. How do we lower the barrier of entry? How do we reach audiences that we hadn't been able to before to actually start creating their first AR experience? So things like that are really positive experiences of like influencing and virtual influencing that we have been able to see. It's reaching new like folks that otherwise wouldn't be reached, and getting to learn new things, which is especially
And
important as
then,
people need to upskill for the metaverse. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, awesome. And if that's the case, like if we're talking about the metaverse, like what, because at the moment, virtual influencers is focusing around social media marketing. What other use cases can we see virtual influencers being used in different industries? Can you share some interesting examples? Is my mic on or off?
Yeah, it's on. I think obvious ones would be like just your organization, playing roles in movies, singing our favorite pop songs. I think Theo earlier was saying like how does generative AI or even like ChatGPT play into this? And that's also feels a little dystopian, but like yeah, what if we have like virtual influencers being artists who create art with generative AI, right? Like there's so many layers to it. But yeah, I'd be curious, Theo, to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think from the educational side of things, I would, the idea of say like financial services, obviously in the context of the metaverse, we're obviously experiencing a huge push in terms of cryptocurrencies and blockchain and NFTs and things. But I actually think that financial inclusion, for example, tied in with the metaverse and teaching people how to better manage the finances. What is money? What is crypto? How does it work? These kind of things, even from a sort of basic sort of side of things. Oh, someone's listening to some really good hip hoppers. Oh, and they're gone. Thanks for that musical interlude. Yeah, I think if you look at certain industries, I think the educational side of things, like Charmaine was hinting at, is something that I think is unexplored at the moment by brands. I think brands are doing a very big push with virtual influencers and brand awareness and in terms of content generation and tying that back to their products, which obviously you can either buy digitally or physically in retail. But I would like to see more brands, or certainly more organizations, if we get away from brands, organizations starting to use this as virtual influencers as a way to reach different audience demographics, to teach them about their services and about basically life in general. Because I mean, there's much more to life than just buying goods and services in retail. And like I said, financial inclusion, education, for example, is something which I think we can use virtual influencers for. It would be great, for example, there's like 500 courses in Minecraft that you can actually jump in and learn about maths, wildlife conservation, green agenda, climate change, etc., etc. And it'd be great if we actually had virtual influencers who were promoting educational courses like that across the metaverse platforms. And I think that's a really powerful statement and message to make, and obviously a really positive impact that a virtual influencer could have. Even brands can get involved in that if they wanted to.
Yeah, can I have a question? You were talking about different platforms, and Minecraft was one of them. Where do you think these educators or these virtual influencers can live beyond Minecraft? Can you share some examples where we could like create these virtual influencers or educators? What other platforms can brands jump on?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, obviously there's Minecraft, but there's well, there's alt. We're living in alt space just now. There's VR chat. There's Roblox, which seems to be very popular in terms of creating worlds. I mean, Roblox is obviously a game platform, but it allows you to create experiences, and you could very much, you could very well create your own in there. There's Decentraland, Somnium Space, and Sandbox, if you want to quote some of the more sort of blockchain or crypto-oriented ones. And then if you're actually skilled in programming, you could learn to use Unity or Unreal and build your own environment. There's nothing to stop someone actually learning these tools, because there's so much free information in YouTube tutorials. You can actually learn to build your own and not actually go into any of the current ones themselves. And then launch your own platforms. So, or if you've got loads of money, pay an agency to do it for you, or a game development studio to do it for you. So, there's existing platforms, but you could also take the giant leap and build your own.
And I think I see a lot of it. Oh, go ahead, Charmaine. Do you want to jump in? Is Snap have their own virtual influences as well?
Oh, I mean, well, you can definitely build your own experiences. I think what's interesting about like what Snap is building is that there's the social AR piece. So like you can both be an influencer that like has a lot of AR experiences, and like you have lenses on you, for example, while creating content with them. So I think that's interesting. But I was just gonna jump on to say, like, I think platforms like Wave XR, like Fortnite, that are now hosting like virtual events are all really interesting. And then another one that like really catches my eye that I think could really go somewhere is like Zepeto. It's kind of like this app that I think it was created by like Snow or something like that, like a Korean company. But it's essentially like this almost like short form content plus games creator, where you have like this avatar that you go to every world in, and then it actually like tracks your face, and you can actually like really create content with this character that you've now built. Things like that would be, I think it's so interesting. Like it could really be anywhere and does not have to be the traditional platforms that already exist. Yeah.
Well,
so
at the moment, virtual influencers doesn't have. At the moment, we see more human avatars, but I've seen on Twitter, for example, maybe because I hang out in the NFT space, that I've seen a lot of virtual influencers are human characters like penguins, unicorns. So I feel like there are other like endless possibilities to explore virtual influencers, and it could be a talking cat, for example. So,
right,
and
like
I think
one step into VR chat and you already see all of the possibilities of where we could go beyond humanoid.
Yeah. And I think and that's like I just think like people are kind of getting ready for virtual influencers themselves. Or, if brands want to jump into it, like what are some of your advice on how to just enter into the space and create a very viral, because everyone wants to go viral a little bit. How do we help brands develop virtual influencers? What are your advice for them? You want to jump in, Charmaine?
I don't think I would be the right person, considering I have not created viral content myself. So Theo, do you have any better advice than that?
I went trending on Twitter. Does that count?
All right, so teach us how you did
that. I think it was fluke more than anything. I think I wrote a piece actually on Medium about not virtual influencers, but just avatars in general, in terms of the fact that it offers us a real opportunity for self-expression, but we're being held back because the platforms only allow us to create human figures, and we've obviously got the very stock. Pick your skin color, pick your hairstyle, pick your clothes, pick your trousers, that kind of sort of thing. And I see avatars, truly allowing people to express themselves, like you say, as a unicorn or as a bear or, a tube of toothpaste or an angry plant or something like that. And I think that's up to us to basically push for those ways of self-expression. And I think brands can go viral if they want by actually pushing for that kind of change as well, and saying, Nike doesn't have to have a virtual influencer that is an athlete, for example. It could choose to create a virtual avatar in a completely different manner, and that in itself would make people sit up and go, well, why has Nike done this? And that in itself would go viral, and it would make people think in terms of, well, this is what Nike sees as it represents itself in a virtual avatar, and hey, well, maybe that gives me the willingness to express myself as a virtual avatar in a completely different way that is not, humanoid in a sense. So I think just stepping outside of your comfort zone and actually brands sitting down and thinking, well, what does our brand represent in terms of its message? What do people see us as? And then manifesting that in a virtual way.
I really like how you talked about manifesting them. And I don't think they need to like spend a lot of money into virtual realities there, but it's almost like they could test out social media platforms to test out and do an MVP. And if that works, then they could like go into the next phase and develop that mascot, that character, that avatar into platforms like Roblox or into Decentraland. So like there's already existing platforms for people and brands to experiment, for them to keep on developing their virtual influencers, because at the moment Instagram has been the biggest platform for people to build up an audience for these virtual influencers that are already existing. The final question I have, and go to Q&A, and also my battery is running low, so if that happens, please just continue on. But final question, like, where do you think the future of virtual influencers is heading, and how can we keep up with the trends? Do you want to start, Shami?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the obvious things that if you're kind of involved in these like VR chat worlds, etc., you'll see that like a lot of influence right now is from Japanese culture. Like we see like KDA, like all these like Hatsune Miku, like they are very heavily like Japanese influenced. And I think that this changed over time as well, right? Like as kind of these virtual influencers get more popular, brands start getting into them, like you get the kind of Western side of the world excited and start having their influence in this space as well. I think that is something that's interesting. I think the creation of more like these type of avatars, not necessarily like human avatars, but like just avatar based apps and games right now. I see like social media, like Instagram, Facebook, even like Snap has their own Bitmojis. Like they're kind of urging people to create avatars and have like digital representations of themselves. So I think as we kind of push towards that, things like platforms like Zepeto, like I mentioned, I think that's really interesting. And I've also seen even just like anecdotally with like Lens Studio, people bringing in like a 3D model of this avatar that they built, and then they rig it, and then they film themselves in avatar in real time. I think things like that are really interesting. And then I think one other like anecdotal story about virtual influencing is I have a friend who actually started out streaming herself singing on Twitch, and she got super popular as a result of it, and completely blew up, right? But over time, it actually made her like really self-conscious and stressed. Like I think a lot of us are not ready to actually gain a following and like be able to handle other people commenting on everything that there is to comment about a person. And so she actually like stepped away and then came back and started VTubing. And then was actually equally successful and drew an audience that she didn't have before as well. And I can actually see other influencers going down a similar route where being able to actually express themselves more truly in a different form that they're more comfortable in could actually become like the future of what like influencers and celebrities go for as well. So yeah, I think those are the things that really excite me about the space. What about you, Theo?
I think the cost barrier is coming down considerably. I mean, if you look, I think it was last week or the week before, Sony released a mocap system, which is basically like small sort of round pods that you stick in your body for full body tracking. And I think it's only like $2,000. And I can see that flying off the shelf for people who just want to actually experiment. Before, you had to spend a lot of money, even at home on rigging, on VR headsets, powerful PCs, and then learning how to use Unreal Engine or Unity to basically create your own stuff. Now you've got people on Fiverr who can create your own avatar for for not very much money. You've got apps on your phone which can help you build your own sort of avatars and animate them. You've got these really simple mocap systems that allow you to animate them and match them to your own human sort of actions. You've got algorithms that can match your voice to basically lip sync. I think that in itself is going to bring in an influx of new creators who have access to this with very little sort of capital required, who could go viral and become more famous than like big brand virtual influencers who have spent a lot of money. And I think that's really exciting. And then you've got like we talked at the beginning, the sort of dovetailing of virtual influencers with sort of AI capabilities that almost become fully automated. And the human control is almost like a puppet on a string kind of thing. And that in itself, I think over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, we'll see an explosion in a completely different direction. I think what I'd like to see more of is this kind of thing. Virtual avatars and influencers kind of helping people with mundane queries as like first line support in a metaverse context, or certainly in a 3D context, whether it's still on social media or whether it's in a metaverse platform. So I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation, but I think the cost barrier is going to bring in a lot of creativity as well.
So my key takeaway from what Theo and what Charmaine was saying, just experiment, have fun, because we're still in the early days. And if anything, if anyone who has any questions, I'll love it if you raise your hands, and please ask questions about virtual influencers. Do you have any questions for Theo or Charmaine? I just want to say thank you, and also to our host before. She was answering our question and took over the space, but I found like the virtual influencers can go beyond brand, and we could like use it as a way to explore storytelling and explore different ways of like expressing ourselves. So does anyone have questions? I'm calling out Eugene, my friend. Like, do you have a question for Theo or Charmaine?
Yeah, so I guess my question would be, as everybody is continuing to build out virtual influencers in their own representation, how do you protect identity theft of fake people or virtual influencers? Like how do you protect people from stealing your IP and then pretending to be you?
That's actually a really good question, and I don't think we have the means at the moment, because we're not really thinking about identity and authentication at this point in time. I think because you can create an avatar, or certainly you can either do it yourself or pay someone to create the approximation of someone else's avatar, and then we've seen parody accounts on Twitter, and it's really easy. All you need is a Gmail address and then a name, and that's it. And you've created a parody account, and then you can basically gain a following and look at bored Elon Musk. That's how he started. And in the virtual sense, you can do exactly the same thing. Gmail address, I can log into Altspace, I can pretend I'm you, and nobody would know the difference, other than obviously I've got a very strong Scottish accent and you don't. But that's how do I tell? How do people tell it's actually me? Well, they don't. And until we actually come up with a method of authentication that actually ties us to our avatar, and our avatar is something that our virtual self is something that we carry from platform to platform and is recognizable, then it's going to be quite difficult, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think we don't have the proper infrastructure in place to actually be able to authenticate and do that right now. Clearly in Web 2, we've been able to do actual manual verifications on Twitter, or like things like that, where, or like even like 2FA requiring you to actually like double verify your identity through another device, etc. I think all of those like sprinkle the seeds for what this could look like. But yeah, I think along with a lot of things in this space, like it's just we have to be the ones who figure it out. So yeah.
I think if we treat like a virtual influencers like characters, like for example, Hello Kitty is a character within the scenario world, they kind of like develop an IP around her and make sure that she's treated like a product. If the virtual influencer is treated like a product, they could probably sit within the legal framework to protect that character or that identity. So I just think that there's other, you probably have to like treat it as a product, and that way you could like protect it as well. But it'd be an interesting exploration if once like AI comes in play, who owns that IP or who owns that character will be an interesting conversation as well. Natita has a question. Would you like to ask the question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi there.
Hi. I have a question around the digital divide and barrier to entry for virtual influencers. We talked a lot on day one about not a lot of people have access to the VR headsets, and there's skills required for building experiences, content creation in VR, unlike, let's say, TikTok or Instagram, where you just need a smartphone. How do we prevent this VR influencer ecosystem from being monopolized by just certain communities, or just like the haves versus the have-nots?
So
I
go ahead.
think that. Oh, so go on, Charmaine. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I think that there are already ways that folks have been doing this. Like, even for example, like Rec Room, right? Like Rec Room, you can do it on VR, but then you can also do it on mobile. Altspace, you can do it on like in VR, but then you can also do like desktop and whatnot. And I think they're like piloting things on Mac, etc. So I think those are ways that we can start bridging the gaps in between like the cost of these XR headsets, or like what requires to be able to have like full body tracking, for example, as we wait for the cost for those to come down over time. How do we still have this like tie between the two so that it's not a true divide and more of like a stepping stone, and we have like clear connection points between the two. Oh, someone's audio is
Sounded like an angry cat.
don't eat us. But yeah, go ahead, Theo. Okay, back to you now.
No, I was just going to echo what you said, and I think that it's up to, obviously content creators, brands, but also the platform owners to make sure that that the platforms and the systems that we use are accessible to everybody. I mean, there's 8 billion mobile phones or mobile devices on the planet, and so therefore that's the most accessible device that we should be aiming for first. And then we go, and then we build kind of sort of backwards from that. We don't build from VR headsets and then think about what's next. We actually build for the most accessible device that we have, and then go backwards or go forwards from that. So, if we're looking at creating systems for virtual influencers and for catering for that sort of digital or negating that digital divide, then we build for mobile phones first. And of course, mobiles have browsers, so we should look at mobile browsers and apps as the primary means for accessing virtual content. And then we go up to tablet, then we go up to PC or Mac, and then we go and then finally we go to VR. And of course, mobile phones allow us to access not only 3D spaces via the browser or an app, but also augmented reality as well. Like Snap's AR filter is a perfect example. And so, I think, everybody who is thinking about building platforms or building content or building, certainly or advising brands even, I think have to think about accessibility first. And to me, mobile phones are your first stepping off point for anything really.
But also, like, I feel like Metaverse Safety Week did a good job as well. Like, they made sure that they filmed this panel as well, so then like could be consumed afterwards as well. So people think about real time conversation, but then they should factor in like how do you do it post production as well. So then people know that people consume content differently as well, like 2D or in real life experience. But I really like what you said there, Via and Charmaine. Do you have any more questions as well?
Hi, yes, I had a question or just maybe a comment to go up of what was being discussed before about knowing if we are interacting with virtual influencers or not. The new act under consideration in the EU for AI regulation would require that if a human is interacting with an AI, it would need to be disclosed. And so I wonder if you think that that kind of disclosure would work for virtual identity. I guess it would be, you know, a pop-up or something that would come along those lines. But do you think that that sort of disclosure would work for even, you know, virtual influencers who are not AI controlled or who may be in the future? But do you think that that would be like a solution in the short term to some of these issues?
I think it would be actually. It's almost like the Twitter check mark. Obviously not now because it's become a complete farce. But I think in the olden days of or ye olden days of Twitter, the check mark actually had some, you know, you had to undergo a verification process and obviously protect your account, like Charmaine said, with 2FA and everything else. But you had to prove who you were through identification means, you know, by providing passport or whatever your country's ID system was. And then they would verify your credentials against, well, are you that influential that you claim to be? You know, where's your website? You know, where are news articles about yourself, etc. So if we can do that for influencers and there is some kind of check mark that's easily identifiable and easily referenceable, and then obviously add to that your point about the regulation in terms of, you know, is this a real person or is this an AI? Then that's a step towards authentication in a sense. I think we have to start. I think the first step is thinking about what are these authentication avenues that we have to, you know, put in place that prove that the person behind or person driving the avatar is who they say they are and is the real influencer.
Do you think like, you know how we have a list of database of humans with our passports? Do you think virtual influencers will have their own database and their own passport to say, hey, I'm a like an AI or a avatar or not a real not a human? Do you think that will exist into play in the future? More database?
Yeah, I think that's possibly where the whole sort of Web3 and blockchain side of things comes into play, because blockchain is supposed to be transparent and publicly referenceable. And I think maybe perhaps the whole idea of your wallet being tied to your avatar is how we authenticate and identify and then prove, you know, who we are in a metaverse context.
Yeah, I think the difference between like us in person doing these things right now and having passports is like it's very much like a one-to-one relationship, whereas I can see like virtual influencing and just like avatars in general or these things, like it'll be very much like a one-to-many relationship. But yeah, I think there's still ways to like trace back to a single person at the other side of this.
Eugene, do you have a question?
I do. What is your favorite historical virtual influencer? Mine is Tony the Tiger.
Oh my God, there's a question.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm like thinking all of my like Barbie Bratz. Like I recently replayed the Bratz game and like on the Switch, and I thought it was like so great, and I still love all of those characters. And they just really speak to me. I think those are interesting. In terms of like the new age ones, I thought the first one that really resonated with me was KDA, like the League of Legends girl group, that actually like went and performed at the championships, and like actually they put like AR overlays, and there were both like people performing in person, but then they also had like virtual influencers like in between the performances. It was really interesting. I thought that was like a standout for me. Yeah.
I
And
honestly I think you've caught me on the hop on this one, because I cannot think of a single virtual influencer that I have been enamored by and then either excited by. I played video games for 40 odd years. You would think I would have one, but to be honest, I haven't actually. You mentioned Tony the Tiger, and now obviously it's like, oh, of course, but then he never really made me go off and beg my mum to go and buy a box of Frosties, for example. So I just can't think. I have to say, I'm completely stumped on this one.
oh, KFC did a virtual influencer called Colonel Sanders, and they created a virtual influencer around him, and I thought that was hilarious. And in
Right. Yeah,
Japan,
that one's really good.
yeah, he made him into a romance character, a cover for like a romance book. It was hilarious. It became you thought that's hilarious. And also, I feel like Japan also like leveraged the IP and created a whole dating sim around Colonel Sanders as well.
Oh my
I
God.
thought that was hilarious. We have a question from Cave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is going to kind of end it on a light note. My question is so too heavy, but since we have about 4 minutes, and I'm really keen to hear from all of you, if you could take a moment of reflection into really thinking about, you've got these virtual influencer, corporate mascots, artificial intelligence driven identity, virtual identity. So take a moment with me, all of you, to let me understand, like, whose responsibility should it be to set a good standard with respect to culture, with respect to inclusion, with respect to, influencing people? Whose responsibility should it be? Because, as influencers, the responsibility has lied on, hey, you are a person with millions of followers, your behavior matters, etc. When the companies are owning these brands and influencers, how do we tackle with this sort of a more of a larger, big cultural context issues? And is there any way to tame this beast? Because it's probably just like a wild, wild west. I would love to, know from you all who are in this space, how do we, who shares all these responsibilities?
Great question, and one to contemplate. Do you want to start, Theo? Charmaine, then I could finish it off.
Okay. Well, at the end of the day, I mean, if we remove AI from this for now, it doesn't matter if it's a virtual influencer. At the end of the day, there is a person behind it. Now, whether that person is acting on their own agency or acting on the agency behind, with the power of a company behind them, it's whoever is directing that particular influencer to act and say and do the type of things is responsible. If it's an organization, then it's the organization is responsible, because they're ultimately setting the tone of the message and the marketing and the influencer itself, and obviously commanding the audience to go away and do things, because that's what they're there for. And if it's a person or if it's a human being driving this avatar, then they are responsible and they're beholden to whatever laws that might affect a particular region or a particular demographic as well. When you add AI into this, depending on the levels of automation, again, AI is not autonomous. Let's put it that way. There is still levels of responsibility on the people who developed it, the people who are packaging it and selling it, and then the people who are actually feeding it as well. So we've seen examples where you can create a benevolent chatbot, for example, and people have quite easily subverted it to say and do and act in manners which are offensive to some people and cultures. And that's still under the direction of the company that built the AI to sort that out. So I think the levels of responsibility should be fairly clear. I think it's up to us in a sense, basically make sure that those lines are drawn in the sand and they step up to them.
And final words from Charmaine. Who do you
Yeah.
think should be responsible for this? Virtual
Yeah.
influencers.
That couldn't be said better, right? Like, I think it's the people here. I think people in this room who are helping with this like thought leadership, paving the way for everyone else, right? Like, a lot of us are both like the consumers of this technology, but also the producers of this technology, right? So I think about how I work on a lot of creation tools and products that other people use to create potentially these virtual influencers and experiences, and how do I make sure that not only am I being ethical from the standpoint of allowing creation, but also downstream impacts of consumption in the long run. So I think for us right now, it's like not just thinking about how people would use Lens Studio to create experiences, but how would those experiences that get created then be consumed by folks on the other side that are using Snapchat or cross-posting to other platforms, or CameraKit to distribute AR experiences off of Snapchat, right? So I think it's all about that, right? Like being able to, for folks who are building these products, like being able to sit candidly with your team and thinking about these impacts. Often it's really tough. You're moving really fast, and it's always an afterthought. So how do we not do that and actually have like a little council? We have like a little center of excellence that actually talks about these things. How do we? Yeah, I think it starts with things like these, and then how do we one day put a framework around it, the way that we do with like other open standards and guidelines that we have for people living, and yeah. So
Thank you so much, Charmaine and Theo. We're going to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone in the crowd for being part of the conversation about virtual influencers. In many ways, you being an avatar now, you're setting the stone and setting the seed to become virtual influencers and creating the environment for us and how we interact and behave as well. So I just want to thank Metaverse Safety Week and our sponsors today and wrap it up. But please connect with Theo and Charmaine, and I'm sure that you have more questions about virtual influencers as well. Thank you so much, everyone. And let's get a round of applause for our guest speakers today, our panelists today. Emojis.
Thanks, everyone.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I have to jump, so I'll see y'all later. Bye.
Ciao.